Somewhere, right now, someone is standing across from a narcissist, waiting for two words. I'm sorry. They'll wait for weeks. Some wait for years. Some wait an entire relationship and never hear it. Not because the narcissist doesn't know they were wrong. They know. They've always known. What you're watching isn't arrogance wearing a smug little grin. It's a 5-alarm fire going off inside someone's nervous system. And to them, an apology doesn't feel like an act of decency. It feels like walking straight into the flames. In this video, we're going to explore why narcissists almost never apologize, and why the popular explanation, that they simply think too highly of themselves to admit fault, is wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. By the end, you'll understand the real mechanism driving the silence. A shame so unbearable, it gets buried under armor thick enough to fool everyone, including the person wearing it. And you'll walk away with a way to spot the difference between guilt and shame in your own reactions, so you never end up building that same armor. Let's start by killing the myth. The story we tell ourselves about narcissists is that they're too proud to say sorry, too self-important, too in love with their own reflection to bend the knee. It's a satisfying story because it makes them the villain and you the reasonable one. But it doesn't hold up under research. Arrogance is stable. Arrogance can look you in the eye. What you actually see in a narcissist cornered by their own mistake isn't confidence. It's panic wearing confidence's clothes. To understand why, you need to understand the difference between two emotions we treat as interchangeable, but which psychologists have shown are almost nothing alike: guilt and shame. Psychologist June Tangney spent decades studying this distinction, and her research draws a hard line between the two. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. Guilt is about behavior, specific, fixable, contained to a single moment. Shame is about identity, global, sticky, and impossible to repair with an action because it isn't attached to an action in the first place. Tangney's work found something else too, something that matters enormously here. People who are shame-prone don't become more remorseful when confronted with wrongdoing. They become more defensive. They externalize blame. They get angry at the person pointing out the mistake, because the mistake isn't being experienced as, I did this. It's being experienced as, I am being exposed as fundamentally rotten. Now hold that idea and layer it under the surface of a narcissist's grandiosity, because that surface didn't build itself for no reason. The psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut spent his career treating patients with exactly this profile, and what he found reshaped how we understand narcissism. Underneath the grandiosity, Kohut identified something he called the narcissistic wound, a core self that never got the mirroring, the validation, the steady sense of being enough, that a developing child needs to feel secure. Instead of growing a stable identity, that child grows a performance, a self built entirely out of external proof, achievement, admiration, status, being right. It works, until something threatens to strip the performance away. And nothing strips it away faster than being told you hurt someone. Otto Kernberg, another psychoanalyst working the same territory, described the grandiose self as a kind of psychological exoskeleton, not a personality trait sitting on top of a healthy identity, but a structure built specifically to protect an internal world that feels, underneath it all, empty and fragmented. Ask a narcissist to apologize, and you're not asking them to admit a mistake. You're asking them to voluntarily remove the exoskeleton in front of you and reveal what's underneath. Most people would rather do almost anything else. This is where the psychology stops being abstract and starts explaining behavior you've probably witnessed firsthand. Have you ever watched someone get caught in something small, a lie, a broken promise, a careless comment, and respond with an anger that felt wildly out of proportion? That's not a coincidence. Researcher Roy Baumeister, along with Laura Smart and Joseph Bowden, ran a now famous line of research on what they called threatened egotism. Their findings overturned a popular assumption at the time, that aggression comes from low self-esteem, from people who secretly feel worthless lashing out. What they actually found is that the most volatile aggression comes from people holding an inflated, unstable self-image that has just been challenged. Not low self-esteem, threatened self-esteem. The narcissist doesn't explode because they think little of themselves. They explode because, For one unbearable second, someone made them see themselves the way they secretly fear they actually are, and the ego has exactly one move left: attack the messenger. There's one more piece of the machinery worth naming, because it explains why this whole system runs on such a hair trigger. Psychologist Mark Leary proposed something called Sociometer theory. The idea that self-esteem isn't really a measure of how much you like yourself. It's a gauge, constantly running in the background, tracking how accepted and valued you are by the people around you. For most people, that gauge is relatively stable. It dips, it recovers, it doesn't run the whole show. For a narcissist, the gauge is the whole show. Their entire sense of worth is contingent, moment to moment, on external proof of value. An apology doesn't just cost them pride. It sends the gauge into free fall, because admitting fault out loud is handing someone else the exact evidence their deepest fear has been running on for years, that they are not in fact enough. Put all four pieces together, and the picture becomes obvious. Shame that can't be metabolized. A grandiose self, built specifically to hide it. Rage as the automatic defense when the hiding fails. And a self-worth gauge with no floor underneath it. That's not arrogance. That's a nervous system in a permanent low-grade state of siege. And an apology is the one thing guaranteed to breach the wall. Let's turn now to a moment that shows exactly what this looks like in real life. The story of Robert McNamara, and the weight of the word wrong. For decades, Robert McNamara was one of the most consequential and unapologetic men in American public life. As Secretary of Defense during the escalation of the Vietnam War, he was the architect of strategy behind a conflict that would eventually cost tens of thousands of American lives and over 1 million Vietnamese lives. For years after leaving office, McNamara stayed almost entirely silent about the war. When he did speak, he spoke in the cool, technical language of statistics and strategy. Never regret. Colleagues described a man who could recite casualty projections without his voice ever cracking. To the public, it read as cold indifference, arrogance from a man who never had to answer for the wreckage. But in 2003, 4 decades after leaving the Pentagon, McNamara sat down for a documentary called The Fog of War, and something in him finally cracked open. On camera, in front of the world, he said the words he'd spent 40 years building an entire identity to avoid saying, "We were wrong, terribly wrong." Watch the footage, and you don't see relief. You see a man in visible physical distress, his hands, his breathing, the long pauses where he can barely finish a sentence. That's not what confidence looks like when it finally decides to be honest. That's what 40 years of buried shame looks like when the wall finally gives out. Here's the transformation worth sitting with. McNamara didn't stay silent for decades because he believed he'd done nothing wrong. Every biographer who studied him agrees on this. He knew. He knew for years. What kept the words locked inside wasn't a clear conscience. It was an identity so tightly fused to being the brilliant, in-control strategist that admitting fault didn't feel like correcting a decision. It felt like admitting the entire self was a lie. It took him losing nearly everyone who could still be angry at him. The war long over, most of his harshest critics gone, before the shame became survivable enough to speak. That's the tragedy hiding inside every unapologetic narcissist you've ever known. The apology isn't usually gone forever. It's buried under something that takes most people decades, therapy or total collapse to dig through. Some never make it. Some, like McNamara, only get there once nearly everything else has already been lost. So where does that leave you? Because here's the part most videos on this topic skip entirely. Understanding why narcissists don't apologize isn't just about them. It's a mirror. Every one of us has a version of that shame versus guilt switch sitting inside us. The question isn't whether you have it. It's which setting you default to when you're the one who messed up. That's where I want to leave you with something practical. A framework I call the Guilt Bridge Protocol. 3 steps, and it works whether you're trying to hold a narcissist accountable without getting pulled into their storm, or trying to build genuine, unshakable accountability in yourself. Step 1. The freeze frame. The moment you feel that hot flush of defensiveness rising after a mistake, the urge to explain, deflect, or counterattack, stop and physically pause before you speak. That heat is your nervous system trying to decide, in real time, whether this is guilt, or shame. Give it 3 seconds before it decides for you. Step 2. The separation cut. Consciously rewrite the sentence in your head. Not "I am careless," but "I did something careless this one time." Not "I am a bad partner," but "I handled that conversation badly." This isn't self-help fluff. It's the exact mechanism Tangney's research points to as the difference between people who repair relationships and people who destroy them defending their own image. You are cutting the behavior loose from your identity, on purpose, every single time. Step 3. The repair rehearsal. Say the actual words, out loud, before you need them. "I was wrong, and here's what I'm going to do differently." Practice it the way you'd practice anything you're bad at, because if you've spent years defaulting to shame, this sentence will feel physically foreign in your mouth the first dozen times. That's not a sign you're failing. That's a sign the muscle is finally being used. The reframe I want you to walk away with is this. The next time someone in your life refuses to say sorry, stop asking why do they think they're better than me, and start recognizing what's actually happening. A person so afraid of what they'd find underneath their own armor that they'd rather lose you than look. That won't make the hurt disappear, but it will stop you from mistaking their fear for your worthlessness. And the next time you catch that same hot flush rising in your own chest after your own mistake, that's your moment to choose differently. Guilt over shame. Repair over armor. Every single time you get the chance. Most people click away the second a video asks something of them. You didn't. You sat with the harder truth instead of the comfortable one. And that's not a small thing. That's the exact instinct that separates the people who stay stuck from the people who actually change. So if any of this landed, do one thing before you go. Hit like, hit subscribe, and let the next video find you the way this one just did.